Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Let's Process That podcast. I'm your host, Emily Christopher.
And I'm Nick Connerkamp.
My fantastic, incomparable co-host, Nick. It's always a joy to be back with you, and we just welcome anyone who's a first-time listener. Nick and I are old friends. He used to be my boss. We've walked through a lot of different seasons of highs and lows and life transitions. Yeah.
Yep.
And we just like to process and talk about things, sometimes sticky situations and touchy subjects, what have you. And that leads us to today's topic. We're going to talk about failure. Wah, wah. But we really want to highlight what we learn from failing. And we're going to share some personal stories. We're going to maybe even get into some places that we didn't think we would lead into, because that's usually what happens when Nick and I throw a topic out. We're like, oh, this went a little different than we thought it would, but that's why we like to process out loud. We don't have all the answers, but we love being able to go on a journey with the human experience and connection. We believe we learn so much from one another and other people, and it comes through us being vulnerable and sharing our stories. So, all that to say, Nick, what do you think about when you think of failure?
So let me give some backstory. First of all, I think it was 2 days ago, I had texted you and said, what are we talking about when we do this next podcast? And about 2 hours ago, you texted me back and said, how about the lessons we learned from failure? I was like, oh, yeah. But the cool thing is both of us are pretty transparent people. Mm-hmm. We don't mind talking about some of those gory details. But I want to make sure this is clear. You and I have said from day one, we don't feel like we have all the answers.
No.
You and I are both verbal processors. We like to talk out loud until we land on something and say, yeah, that's how I really feel. And we've decided that we didn't want to be a podcast that had these absolute truths that come sit at the master's feet and let us school you on something. But rather, let's talk about something a little complicated and see where it goes. So we don't do a whole lot of prep as far as like research and all that. And so when you sent me that text, I was like, okay. So I stopped and I wrote down like 4 or 5 things, failures I remember and things I learned from those things. And I've got a really cool story to open us up if you're ready for me.
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
So I have a person in my life that's been a spiritual father to me named Frank Harvey. And about 20 years ago, I went with him on a ministry trip into South Carolina, I think is where it was. And we were driving back late at night. It was dark outside. I don't know what made me ask this question. I just don't. The very best moments I've ever had. I didn't plan, didn't know they were going to be great moments. They just happened. And I asked him, I said, what's the 3 biggest mistakes you've made in ministry? And that's pretty personal. Like, I was at Laurel Ridge Country Club like a month ago at an art thing, and I met this woman. And we talked for like 5 minutes, and she sat down next to me, and she said, what's the greatest sin you ever committed? I mean, that's a pretty personal, yeah, isn't that a pretty personal question to ask somebody you just met? Yeah. Now, luckily, I had a pretty good sterile answer that came to my mind immediately. I shared that with her. It was a cool moment, great, whatever, and she moved on. But later I thought, wow, what if I just like blown her mind? What if I gave her the worst thing ever? And I'm not even going to go there. But I sort of feel like that's what I did to Frank that night. Is like, what's your 3 biggest mistakes? And he said this to me. I made mistakes that have no redemption to them unless somebody redeems them. And I would be willing to tell you those 3 mistakes if you will make sure you don't make those 3 mistakes and you benefit from them. Then my mistakes didn't cost me nothing. They weren't for nothing. There was a benefit from it. And he told me. In fact, to this day, I only remember the number 1. I don't remember 2 or 3. But I'm positive I didn't create any of those 3. I'm positive those 3. And I thought, how wonderful that somebody would be willing to tell you, I made a mistake here. This is what it cost me. I'm going to give it to you for free. And I'm asking you to not commit the same mistake and benefit from my failure. And I learned from that half of the wisdom I have to give someone is not when I got it right. Mm-hmm. It's when I got it wrong and what it cost me and how I can help you stay away from the same detrimental consequences that I had to walk through. Isn't that pretty crazy?
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Oh gosh. Just the fact that someone would even just put that out there for you and just be like, hey, I'm gonna like pull back the curtain on the deepest, darkest parts and the biggest flops that I could have ever done, and you just have to make a promise that you're not gonna repeat them. Like, that's pretty crazy.
I've never shared the 3 things he told me. I've forgotten 2 and 3, but I remember the number 1 thing.
Yeah.
And I've never even shared it with another soul. It was a private moment, an intimate moment between 2 people. And I learned from it. I grew. I took it to heart. And to this day, I can tell you right now that is nothing that I have ever had to deal with or struggle with. And Frank blessed me with that. Yeah. And so when you sent me that text, emotions from 20 years ago just come rolling back. And I just think about being in that moment. And then my responsibility to pass on some of the things I've walked through to help somebody else.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And I think what's beautiful is we keep that going, right? Like that's kind of the legacy that I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to pass this on to you, to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. And that hopefully breaks the cycle of some things, that hopefully brings freedom, hopefully builds more trust, like all these things that when we share the failure part, the good can come out of it.
And I look at you today. Could you really be you today without some of the bumps you've had to walk through?
Oh my gosh, no. Not even
you couldn't.
Not even a little bit. Like
I agree.
There is no way. And I know a couple of episodes ago I was talking about how much I love my team and my coworkers, and like there's just no way that I would be able to lead at the capacity I do or love them the way that I do, because yes, I'm their leader, but really it's my capacity to love and take care and nurture them. That's really the big thing, right? So there is no way that if I hadn't went through certain things or even been disappointed in other leaders or other people in my life, that I would have not gotten that heart to do the right thing or to love these people in such a grand way. So yeah, no, it definitely is. A lot of good can come out of being very hurt and just falling on your face kind of thing.
Okay, since you used that example, it took me back to a memory, and I'm not going to give the specifics because I don't want to out you or anything, but a time when you were on staff that you really were struggling. It was not good, didn't know whether, and I'm not here to throw any leader under the bus or any other person, but when you think back to some of the really tough times when you were on staff, you had a boss, and you were struggling, and do you look back today and say, dang, it was worth it? I'm glad I walked through it, but it was hell. Because most of us would prefer to not walk through the hard times, but I just don't know that you can get here without the hard times.
Oh yeah, no, there's only so many books that you can read until like you have to have an experience. So no, like yeah, it's easy to like choose to be bitter or angry at the situation, but there's no way I would be where I am. And I actually even had this conversation last night with a friend. I'm like, every hardship, every failure, every bit of pain has made me who I am. And I believe now I'm the best version of myself up until this point. And none of that would have come if everything would have just been so easy, or if I would have always gotten my way, or everything would have just been rainbows and sunshine. There's just no way.
Totally.
So yes, it was hell, and yes, it sucked. And like, I really had to wrestle with feeling like I lost time. And it's so interesting. I've really been working through some stuff because I've trauma blocked a lot of things. Like there's like significant, and those of you who are big into psychology and like trauma healing and just like all this stuff, like there are like chunks of my life, especially between the age of like 24 and 28, that I don't remember. Like I do not remember at all. And it's kind of weird and crazy to think that, but my brain's protecting me. But yeah, if I had not walked through that, I would not be who I am. And then I also believe that the years have been redeemed. Like I've lived so much of a full and fun life in the last 3 years that I feel like all of that I missed out on, quote unquote, has been made up. And I've been like doubly blessed. So it's been worth it.
That is so cool. Well, I'm proud of you, and I've watched your journey, and I would obviously say that though there were some painful moments and unnecessary moments, you embraced them, did not project blame towards someone else, and lose the benefit. See, that's the problem is, and I'm going to paraphrase something John Bevere wrote, but basically he says, when we're hurt, wounded, offended, it hurts. It sucks. It just hurts. But your response is one of two things. Either you blame the person who did it to you and lose all benefit from the bad experience. It still hurts. Or you feel the pain, you embrace it, and you learn from it, and you grow from it. And too many people get stuck in the blame game where so-and-so did this and they shouldn't have done that. But when you do that, then you don't take any responsibility to learn and grow, or especially take responsibility for your part in it, and therefore cannot progress and add to the skill sets, experiences, and wisdom that you need from the experience. And I've always been someone that in every experience I was taught, how much responsibility can I take? I think that is probably, I've never thought this before until right now, probably the greatest single lesson ever taught to me. In every single circumstance, can you take any responsibility? Can you own something, and can you benefit from it? And for whatever reason, that one lesson has helped me grow from every hurt, every pain, every injustice I've had to walk through. And I am a much better person because of that. And probably have never even said it out loud until we just started processing this.
Yeah. Well, I'm also having revelations as we're processing right now. Like there's definitely a situation when I moved that, even looking back, because I've had to really work through a lot of, especially church hurt, that I'm like, Emily, if you would have just not been as prideful and just taken the ownership of you making the confrontation, and just being honest, like with a 6-month window instead of letting time pass, you probably wouldn't still be feeling these feelings. And so I'm like you, I'm like, okay, I need to take the ownership and the responsibility, and either just like fully let it go. Cause I feel like there's like a little bit that I'm holding on to. And like, I just need to also, again, take ownership that, hey, you had a window of time that this really should have been addressed in. And the other party will never do what I think is the right thing. So you need to heal from that, and you need to like let it go. And I've really been working on bitterness in this particular situation, and just not letting it take root, because I feel like obviously that's what the enemy always wants, and that's always what our human default is. But yeah, taking the responsibility too, and knowing that I have the power for myself to say, okay, we're not going to let that bitterness take over. We're going to deal with it, and I'm going to learn from this. And I think there's already lessons that I have learned from it immensely. But what else is there to learn from this? And especially taking initiative over my own confrontation, even though it will be messy. And again, it's funny because you and I talk about this. You and I don't shy away from confrontation. But in that particular one, that was something I just didn't want. And like I said, I think it was really a pride issue. But yeah, what is the lesson? What can we learn? How can we move on for ourselves so we're not walking around with bitterness or judgment, resentment, etc., etc.?
Okay, so I want to get into a couple failures, but before I do, that's like a teaser before the commercial.
Yeah.
I just had a crazy thought, and I wanted to see if you might agree with me.
Okay.
It is not your choice to be hurt, wounded, or offended. It happens. It's life.
Yeah.
But bitterness is a choice.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Bitterness is unresolved hurt, anger, wound, whatever, but it's unresolved. It's something you can control. I can't control if somebody walks up and just lets me have it and just cusses me out. I can't control that. And it may hurt. But if I'm nursing it 6 months from now and I become bitter, I made that choice. And I just think most of the pain I've suffered has been stuff that's my responsibility, my reaction to something else.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And like you were saying, your reaction to even something else, it may not have even actually been that situation. It could be something so much deeper than that, where it's like, oh, this is actually like a rejection wound, an abandonment wound. Like there's so much more layers on layers on layers, that if we really take our healing seriously and we're willing to sit in the mess and figure it out, it's probably even deeper than the original offense.
Okay, so I'll build on that. If you leave your wound open and not closed so it can heal, it will attract other violators to prey on that wound. Yes. And think about how many times we suffered, not once by a situation, but multiple times because we didn't let it heal and we kept attracting people that kept reinforcing that lie or that hurt.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right, so my biggest failure, and I don't think I've ever said this out loud, my biggest failure is the first 2 years of my first son's life. In the first 2 years of a child's life, they learn basic trust or they don't get basic trust. And basic trust is you're good, you're awesome without producing a thing. You can poop in your diaper, you can be hungry, you can cry at night, but we love you, you're awesome, everything's wonderful. And they grow up thinking, I'm awesome, I'm wonderful, I don't have to prove anything. Or they don't get that and they have to learn how to meet that need. When we had our first child, I was working 60 to 70, 75 hours a week trying to provide for that baby. I mean, that's what I thought a man's job was, to provide. When I should have just taken the time and put that baby on my chest and just let him feel my skin, hear my heartbeat, know that I was there, know that I loved him. Now, my oldest son, Caleb, has rebounded wonderfully. He is learning. He still works through a couple of those issues, but he's doing great. He's a successful person. But now that I know what I know, when we had our second baby, it was too much. Both of us had to be involved. And for whatever reason, because Tina was at home all day, I would stay up at night with Hayden Luke, our second son, and I would feed him at night and then go on into work. Well, I was able to instill in him basic trust, and he's fine. He's good, okay? He don't feel like he needs anything. But my oldest son struggled with trying to figure that stuff out. And when I look back as a parent, and I know that you don't have children yet, Emily, but that's when you see a reflection of yourself in your kids, and it's not a positive reflection. That's one of the deepest, most hurtful pains you'll ever experience. And so what I learned from that is connection and relationship matters way more than the physical things you can provide. And I missed it. I thought if I made sure he had food and he had the stuff that he needed, and it was easier for me as a man to go, pony up and go to work and just work a bunch of hours and provide extra money. But looking back, I look at how many times throughout my life I performed at a high level, but robbed people of the connection that they really wanted from me. And the number one complaint I would get from people when I was a pastor is, I just wish you'd take time to meet with me so you could know me. They wanted connection. They wanted relationship. And I was too busy performing. And it went all the way back before I had kids. So, but I learned from that. And today I am less performance driven, more relationally driven, way more on connection and taking a few extra minutes and time to get to know somebody. But that was one of the things that's one of my biggest failures.
So my question then, since you're one of our forgiveness gurus, what was it like having to forgive yourself for that?
I believe in God. And so for me, I just said, there's no parent's going to do it perfectly. There's something they're going to have to run to God for. And that's one of the things that I inadvertently was not able to give my son. And I have to believe that the Lord will help him with that. But I had to forgive myself. I didn't have basic trust. I mean, it's really hard to give something you don't have.
Yeah.
And I didn't have basic trust. And it was easier for me to forgive the people that raised me than it was for me to forgive myself for the way I raised my sons. And at the end of the day, I have to realize I'm another link in the DNA of humankind. And guess what? I did the same stuff everybody else has done.
Yeah.
I was not any better than anybody else. And at some point, you got to say, part of being human is you're going to sit and talk about your failures on a podcast with Emily.
We'll process it out one way or the other, publicly or otherwise.
Oh, wow. You just brought up another failure of mine.
Nope.
Well, when I was a pastor, we had an event called the Global Leadership Summit. I'm sure you remember that. You and I co-hosted that. We did some stuff. It was fun. It's a great event. It's actually this week. And so I remember when I had a group of people at church that were very unhappy that I was bringing that event into the church because they had heard some stuff on the internet of bad stuff, of people involved that was totally unfounded, but they had heard some stuff. And I remember that I thought the best, and so there was a couple other groups of people that also had some other issues. So there was like 2 or 3 groups of people. They all had different issues. I thought it'd be a great idea to get them all together in one room at one time and go public and just say, hey, let's have this public conversation where there's no gossip and wondering and how does Pastor Nick really feel about this? Let's put 50, 60 disgruntled people in a room and just go public and have a public conversation.
A town
What
hall.
What I didn't realize is group 1, when they heard me talking to group 2, got offended with group 2. They got offended for group 2. So they were already offended. Group 1 was already offended with me over their issue. Well, when they heard group 2 was offended with me over their issue, they took up their offense too. And then group 3. So now everybody's offended on all 3 issues because I didn't deal with it one-on-one. I dealt with it in a public group setting. Now, I'm not saying there's not times to deal with things publicly. I'm not saying
Right.
But I'm saying that when you bring already offended people to the table and you lay other offenses on the table, don't be shocked when they pick them up. And then they start representing other people's causes. So when you just said that about public, I was like, oh gosh, there's another one right there that I went ahead and canceled the GLS to appease those people. Canceled it. And all of them left my church anyway. It did nothing. It did nothing. Because some people want to be seen and heard more than they are really fighting over the issue.
Right. Of course.
Well, you say, of course. I was in my 40s and didn't know that lesson.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm still learning that, but I mean, I definitely feel like over the last few years, I have learned painfully that people really just want connection and they want to feel seen, heard, and loved and understood. Like, even if it's the opposite side of what you're feeling or what you believe, they just want like, hey, you may not believe this or you may not see this way, but I need you to like hear me out. And that is huge. And sometimes you don't even have to walk away with some grand resolution. They just wanted to talk.
So, do you know when I discovered this?
Pray tell.
A couple of years ago, I was sitting at one of my favorite establishments in Asheville, downtown Asheville.
The lab?
And I saw a man, a big man, wearing a one-piece yellow onesie. Mm-hmm. Yellow Crocs, yellow purse.
Oh.
No undergarments, and you could obviously see his junk.
Okay, well.
And I am sitting there going, okay, if this bro gets anywhere near me, I've got to ask him what his story is, because it's obvious. He wants to tell, he wants to be seen. I mean, you can't wear a yellow see-through onesie in a purse and yellow Crocs in Asheville and somebody not say, tell me your story, tell me your journey. And it was in that moment that I realized that this guy just wanted to be seen. He wanted to express who he was. And I thought, I've went my whole life thinking people are just trying to figure out how to get by or believe right and wrong for whatever reason they believe right and wrong. But some people feel they take up a cause to be seen and heard. And what they really want is connection, understanding, the gift of time. And I was always so busy as a pastor. That was my biggest failure. People constantly were offended at me because I did not have enough time to stop and get to know them.
Yeah.
Life lesson. Love people where they are or they will get yellow onesies. And then you got to deal with it on that level.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, like as we're just sitting here thinking and talking through, I think one of my biggest failures was creating environments of competition.
Really?
Yeah. Like it's so funny. So I've always been a highly competitive person. I've always been a very performative person and have had to heal and wrestle with that pretty much my whole life. And I really feel like there was a season of life out of my own dysfunction and trauma that I created unnecessary competition, especially with fellow musicians, and like really just, and again, it comes out of my own brokenness, but it is laughable now. Like I honestly, to the point where I was super embarrassed and had to like work through my own embarrassment and shame, because I was like, I do not care about this 1 ounce now. Like, and it was the biggest deal to me in that time of my life. Like, it was everything for me to be getting a 1-up and whatever. And now I am just like, oh my gosh, that was so ridiculous. That is so silly. Ew. Like, it just makes me want to vomit at my own self. And so I just wish, like anything, I mean, and if you're going to get humbled one way or the other, like that's the lesson. So you will get humbled at some point. But definitely just looking back now and it being almost comical, because I really do not care about that competitive piece at all. I want everybody to win. I think, it was really a tactic for division, and I let that reign sometimes. I let that really trump over what should have been something more healthy. So yeah, like if I could go back and redo that, I would. Even though it was a failure, I did learn from it. But like if I could go back with what I know now, I would go correct it. I would right that wrong.
Okay. So would we agree that that was in your early 20s?
Mid-20s.
Okay. Did you create more competition in your mid-20s or as a teenager in high school?
Ooh, mid-20s.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Because now at the stage of life you're in, you've got enough success and
Mm-hmm.
enough of who you are. You've developed, you found strengths that you have and special giftings
Mm-hmm.
that you have that you don't need that anymore. But I think that's a young man's game, a young woman's game, where
Mm-hmm.
you pick competitions to prove to yourself you have what it takes to compete.
Mm-hmm.
When at this stage you have enough successes, it's already been proven. It'd be silly to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's natural. I think it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious because you were a big force of nature in high school as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in high school, well, when you grow up in a small town, I really got humbled a lot in college because when you go to a school of music that is pretty renowned and competitive, you're like, oh, everybody here was the lead in the school musical.
Yep.
Everybody here got all the solos, and that's where we're at. So in high school, it wasn't so much that. And then I got to college, and there was some of that, but it wasn't. I don't know. It just wasn't the same. I don't know. When I left college is when it really kicked into like another level because I think I thought I knew everything and that I deserved it. I deserved it. I've worked hard for this. It should be given to me. Or I know what's best and you all don't. So I think that's where that came in to play.
That's really interesting that you created your own competition to prove to yourself and others that you could win.
Yeah.
When it wasn't necessary.
No.
That's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And I had some awareness of some of the repercussions, but I did not have that deep awareness of what was going on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It would eat me alive. Like, if I look back on, and again, I know a lot of that was coming out of the trauma that I was experiencing and wanting to control something, and I felt like I could control that.
That makes sense.
But I mean, it's so funny. I found a journal from that season of life. Oh my gosh. I was the angriest girl in the world. Like, I was just like, what is going on? Like, I was so mad. I was so angry. And like I said, now I just laugh and I am like, what the heck was that? God, please forgive me. And I definitely have the philosophy that nobody can compete with me because I'm my own person. You can't replicate me. And that sounds kind of cocky, but it's also from the viewpoint of I can't be you. I can't be you. You're your own person. You have your own gifts. I'm going to celebrate you and you're going to succeed. You're going to live. You're going to do your own thing. We are not in competition. We have our own stories, our own journeys, our own successes. So like we cannot compete. We just can't. And that's just my philosophy on it now. But
I heard Glennon say on one of her podcasts that there's a difference between being envious and jealous. Mm-hmm. Envious says, you went to Paris. I wish I could go to Paris too. I'm envious that you got to go to Paris. Mm-hmm. Jealousy is, I don't want you to go to Paris. Mm-hmm. I'm upset you got Paris. And I think there's a huge difference between us saying, your gift is your gift. I have my own gift. And I want the platform. I want the solo or whatever. Mm-hmm. Without also saying, hey, I want mine, just like you got yours, but I'm not trying to take yours to get mine.
Right.
And I think it's a maturity issue that a lot of us have to walk through.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And then, like I said, especially with mine, you just add on everything else that was happening those 4 years. And it's just like, you become quite a mess internally. And then you're trying to mask all of it. It's just exhausting.
I'll unpack this later. I'll think about this later because this is very interesting to have this conversation. So in honor of what you just said, let me tell you another one of my failures.
Yes, please.
So I And in 2008, the real estate market crashed. We had 15 rental properties at the time in 2 different states. I had really spent a lot of time building real estate as my retirement, real estate as our financial thing. Preachers don't get paid very well. And so, can you say amen, Emily?
I can say amen.
All right, thank you. Probably hasn't said amen in a while, so I just trying to work on her, soften her up a little bit. Keep it going. And I remember when the real estate market crashed in 2008, and one of the things about that is I'd never been through a crash. I'd never been through a downturn. I'd read books. Back then I was part of a real estate club and checked out CDs and VHS cassettes and watched these people tell you how to do real estate. I listened, I followed all the stuff, and I bought a bunch of real estate. And in 2008, the market just crashed, and renters couldn't pay rent, and things got nasty, and banks still wanted to get paid, and it was a really, really, really tough time. And one of the things I learned out of that is that I was not prepared for the downturn. I just always assumed things would go high and to the right. Things would just keep going up, right? Well, I want to piggyback that with something. One time I was talking to one of our staff people, Jenny Murray, that you know well. And Jenny said to me she wanted to do something to move forward. And I said, we can't do that because, we've already made an agreement to honor some things from the past. And Jenny says something really horrible to me. And she said, you have forfeited our future for the deals you've made with our past. You have made so many deals with the past before I even got here that now I'm limited at what I can do in the future because of the deals you have made. And she said this to me one day. She says, one of your greatest strengths is one of your greatest weaknesses. And I said, what's that? And she says, your optimism. You're an eternal optimist. You always think it's going to get better. And you will not look the facts in the face. And you will not deal with the bad news that really is real. And that goes back to the real estate. I was always optimistic that I never even saw the signs. I was not even aware. I even after the crash, I was like, it'll be all right. We'll figure it out. We'll just work harder. We'll figure it out. And there's nothing wrong with that attitude. It's just that my optimism kept me many times, not once, many times. She was the first one to say, dude, you're not looking at the vital statistics. This baby's getting ready to die. And you are optimistically going to drive it in the ground because you will not look at the truth. And it was the first time in my life that I did not see my optimism as a strength, and I had to look at it as a weakness. And to this day, I am an optimist, but I also try to be a realist and look at what's really going on. And when do you need to say something's dead? And quit riding the horse that's dead. It's dead. It's not going anywhere. And so that's something that sort of you reminded me of when you were telling your story.
Mm-hmm. And we need people. This is why connection and relationship is so important, to reflect back to us what is the truth, and to gently say, hey, what you're doing is actually to our demise, or it's holding us back, or it's holding yourself back. And then vice versa. Whenever we do fail, we need people to look at us and say, I still love you. I'm still going to cheer for you.
That's not who you are.
Like, we have got, as a community of people, as part of humankind, like, we have got to do that for each other, where gentleness comes in and gives a light correction, gives a gentle hand, because that relationship is there and I can speak those things. And then to also help pull somebody up when they've completely fallen on their face, they've embarrassed themselves, they've failed, whatever, and to look at them and say, that's not your identity. And it may not be a bounce back quick kind of thing, but we're going to be here for you as you rebuild, as you work through this, whatever.
What's interesting about that, Em, is that last Saturday I got a chance to speak to a bunch of men about spiritual fathering and what it means to be a natural father and what it means to be a spiritual father. And I boiled it down and I just said, Frank Harvey is my spiritual father because of 2 things. Just 2 things that any of us can do. He loved me when I wasn't lovable. Mm-hmm. And he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's it. Mm-hmm. I crashed and burned, did something stupid, and he says, that's not who you are. Mm-hmm. That's not who you are. I love you anyway. That was dumb. That was stupid, but that's not who you are. Mm-hmm. Or I believe you can do this. And I'm like, I just failed 18 times in a row. And he's like, it's okay. I believe in you. And those two things, which one of us can't love someone who genuinely is heartbroken over their bad behavior? Mm-hmm. And which one of us can't believe in someone who just failed, but you see the potential in them, or you've seen them succeed before, and you give them another chance? And so those are some lessons that we can learn on the backside of failure.
Yeah, and it's so easy to give that support and love to somebody. Like I said, I was talking to a friend last night, and they were like, oh, I just did this thing, and I'm embarrassed that I did that. And I just paused, and I was like, hey, hold on. And because they even asked me, they're like, what do you think about this? How do you think I handled this? And I was like, you have a great heart. I have never known you to intentionally ever hurt anybody ever. So let me remind you that you are a good person with a good heart. Yeah, and you don't have the answers. You're working through something, and it's a belief system that they're wrestling with right now. And I was like, you would never intentionally hurt or do damage to somebody. And so you have to shake that off and say, I'm learning, I'm growing, and keep moving forward. And after that conversation, they were just like, oh my gosh, like this, you don't know how much like these 3 sentences have changed everything for me. And I can rest and I can be of sound mind right now. Yeah. And again, we have to do that for one another. And then we also have to echo those things back to ourselves. Because yes, you can have somebody like blue in the face telling you that, but until you accept it and you let that really permeate who you are, you're going to replay the failure. You're going to replay the awkward, the cringe, the moment that you had such a moment that was out of control or whatever it may have been, or you made the worst decision. You will allow that to replay until you get it in your heart and your mind, your soul. So listen to the people when they're helping pull you out of a moment of spiral. And you have to, kind of just coach yourself and speak to yourself gently.
Which is crazy because the people in our life that we've put around us are people we respect and people we love. And then they say something nice about us and we want to discount that. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not your enemy. It's your friend that's trying to encourage you. And yet we're like, oh, I can't believe that about myself. And I'm like, okay, you're friends with this person because you love them, you respect them, you believe in them. And now you don't because they're talking about you. And so somehow we've got to get past all that stuff. And I think some of it's just life, right? Like, who I was as a teenager, who I was in my 20s, who I was in my 30s. Mm-hmm. There's just things I don't need anymore. I don't care about anymore. Mm-hmm. I feel completely content in who I am in my own skin. I have this big speaking engagement coming up. I'm not nervous about it at all. I'm just like, maybe I'll bomb. I don't know. It's like, what would that do? Nothing. It'll be okay,
Yeah, well, and your identity's not wrapped up in that.
Yeah, it's not.
That's what the freedom. That's the freedom. Is that my identity and who I am is not hinging on an opportunity.
So I'll leave you with this. Mm-hmm. My best birthday was when I turned 50. My worst birthday was when I turned 30. The reason my 30th birthday was my worst birthday is I had not done anything with my life. I was a failure. I had wasted 30 years of my life. I had not accomplished anything. It was horrible, and I was a big disgrace. When I was 50, when I turned 50, it was my best birthday. And I was like, I've succeeded enough and done enough good things in my life that I feel like my life has mattered. But I also am young enough to make adjustments. And when I look forward, I'm like, wow, if I make these adjustments, the next 20, 30 years could be amazing. So I would say to all you young bucks out there, chill, just chill. And there's a day coming when you're going to have enough fruit in your basket that you're going to be able to say, I'm proud of myself. I've lived. I've done well. And you'll look ahead and say, wow, I still got time. I might even be great one day. Mm-hmm. And so 50 was my best birthday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So friends, please sound off in the comments even, sharing about anything that you learned from failure. I truly believe some of our failures can catapult us into greatness and make us who we are, make us into the person that of influence, a person who really contributes in a way that we wouldn't even imagine because of the lived experience that we've had. So thank you for joining us. Nick, I appreciate you and your vulnerability. Always, that's probably one of the most amazing accolades you have is your ability to be vulnerable and honest.
Thank you.
And we just appreciate you guys for tuning in. And like I said, we want to hear from you. So if there's anything that you would like to share, whether it's via email or in the comments or wherever on our social media, we love to hear from you guys because, again, we all learn through each other's relationships and human experience. So share those things with us. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to our producer, Adrian Wos. This incredible music that you're hearing right now is by Caleb Honerkamp. All of our photography is done by Before the Foundations Photography, which is Allison Frost, and you can check out any more information on all of them below in the description. All right, we will see you next time, friends. Have an incredible week. Bye-bye.